Without my involvement, they organized the entire wedding. No invitation, no justification. Facebook pictures with the message, "Family means everything." If you've ever found yourself absent from a family photo, this story is for you. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to Reddit Family Tales for more genuine stories that shed light on the inner struggles we all encounter. Please like, share, and comment below. Has someone overlooked you when they should have recognized you first? A Facebook post informed me that my sister was getting married. The morning was a Tuesday. I had just finished editing a group of pictures from a vacation to Vermont, which included rust-colored barns, misty hills, and a horse that seemed to be telling a secret while staring into the camera. On one of those infrequently calm mornings, the coffee was still warm and the inbox wasn't yet full. Then, Vanessa agreed. With our parents embracing her from both sides, a boomerang of her palm flashing a ring, and the caption, "She's marrying the man of her dreams. Our family couldn't be happier." However, it seems that I was excluded from that family. There was no message sent. There was no phone call. Not even a general group text was sent. A frame that has been neatly cropped. I spent a lot of time looking at that picture. Long enough to see the ring, but not the diamond, just the inward curve of Vanessa's pinky. Vanessa had a habit of feeling anxious. When she was concealing something, she always did it. I refrained from crying. I didn't feel astonished. I simply felt empty. I experienced a sense of detachment as I observed the progression of another person's life. As a child, Vanessa was consistently the chosen one. The one who sang at recitals while I held the camcorder and donned silky dresses. She was the one who received extra portions at dinner and brought home awards. Me, I kept quiet, captured images, mended damaged items, made an early rent payment. I spoke softly so that no one could accuse me of being too much. Our parents simply didn't see me. They didn't despise me. That was okay, I used to reassure myself. I felt free since I blended in with the background. If there were no expectations put on me, I didn't have to live up to them. However, in times like this, I became acutely aware of how much I still desired something insignificant and unsaid. A location, a reference, a place at the table. I gave my mother a call later that evening. Her voice sounded light and joyful as if nothing had gone wrong. Despite spending weeks organizing guest lists, catering, and fittings, she seemed to have never typed my name. I said, "Hello, Mom," being cautious not to reveal anything. She didn't inquire how I was doing. She took off directly in the weather. It was already spring. There were daffodils in blossom. Vanessa's altered dress was truly stunning. I paused, then said, "So, I suppose the wedding is coming up." She paused just long enough to validate my presumptions. At last, she answered, "Oh, sweetie, it's nothing personal." We simply reasoned that it might not be your type of crowd. Is the crowd at my sister's wedding not my type? A hush fell. A quiet laugh followed. You understand what I mean. Quiet things have always appealed to you. You could be in Iceland or any other place. There will be a lot of noise. There will be speeches, champagne, and a sizable gathering from various business networks. I remained silent. "We didn't want you to feel out of place," was the actual cut that followed. It dawned on me then that they hadn't simply forgotten me. I had been purposefully excluded. It would have been simpler if they didn't detest me. No, they didn't include me as I didn't match the theme of their carefully manicured ideal of beauty. So I purchased a plane ticket. To Iceland. One way. The purpose was not to escape. The intention was not to express criticism. Finally, I found myself in a place where silence signified peace instead of punishment. Iceland differed from the other locations I visited. There was no need for me to smile. Whether I belonged or not was irrelevant to it. There was no need for pretending engaging in small talk or providing explanations. It simply left me alone. Early in March, I got there. Like a silent recollection that would not go away, the snow continued to cling to the hills. The air tasted pure untainted by filtered expectations or familial strife, and the skies glowed with old silver. Just past the thermal springs close to Selfoss, I leased a tiny wooden hut. It featured a wood-burning stove that required enticement each morning, creaky floors, and a single bedroom. Nobody was around. There were no neighbors asking questions. No strangers observed you for an extended period. I kept my destination a secret from everyone. Not even my mother knew about it. Not Vanessa. Even the few acquaintances I kept at a distance were not affected. Gone off grid was the only message I left on my work email. Return when I'm prepared. Wrapped in a wool blanket, I sat on the cabin's front steps that first morning and watched the steam rise from my mug. I pondered whether stillness could truly mend the parts of me that had been neglected for so long as I listened to the wind whistle through the window cracks. I wasn't upset. The most peculiar aspect was that I had assumed I would be. More than anything else, though, I felt exhausted. I'm tired of trying to win the affection of people who only noticed me when they needed a contrast. The quiet one, the strange one, the person who falls behind Vanessa. When I was younger, it sounded lovely when they referred to me as our little mystery. It was code for, we don't know what to do with you, I discovered later. I learned to read between the lines, even if they never stated it directly. I was on the edge of my seat for the family portraits. The birthday cards, if they arrived at all, were always late. The way they talked about my work and Vanessa's achievements as if they were everyone's, as if it were a pastime I would ultimately outgrow. Nevertheless, I returned home for the holidays. I did, however, smile when on Zoom calls. Nevertheless, I sent gifts for which no one remembered to express gratitude. A part of me persisted in holding on to hope. I hoped they would notice me if I simply did. Enough became enough, or was enough. Not as the smart, beautiful bride Vanessa, but as someone who mattered. Ultimately, relinquishing that hope necessitated an invitation-only wedding. I drove the ring road by myself on my third day in Iceland, leaving my phone in airplane mode. With dark volcanic soil, distant glaciers, and waterfalls cascading like secrets too old to bear, the scenery was unearthly. I paused at a cliff with a view of the ocean and stood for a long time, my eyes watering from the cold and the wind in my face. Between the roar of the wind and the smashing waves, I muttered a single word that I had never said aloud before. I no longer require their love for me. And I meant it for the first time in years. They were making seating charts and floral arrangements at home. I was learning how to stay calm while I was here in Iceland. Peace, however, has a way of bringing forth the dead. Additionally, my phone chimed on the fourth morning when I was preparing a pot of water to boil and folding a wool jumper, even though it shouldn't have. It was still in airplane mode. However, I had turned it on at some point the previous evening, either out of habit or perhaps for a deeper reason. It was vibrating with a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years as it sat on the kitchen table. Sabrina. Since high school, Vanessa has been best friends. The girl who braided my sister's hair referred to me as Little Helena, as if I were a stray puppy that followed them around. She sent a brief text. Are you observing? You must. A connection was present. I paused. It had been days since I checked social media. I would rather not view pictures from a wedding that I wasn't at. I would rather not listen to my sister's voice reading vows or scroll through videos of my parents laughing under fairy lights. However, there was something in Sabrina's tone that made my fingers move before I could stop them. It was clipped and frenzied, unlike her usual polished elegance. I clicked on the link, and there it was. It was a live broadcast. The camera shook as if someone had hidden the phone under a tablecloth or behind a purse. Although the image was first hazy, I was able to identify the location, the Glasswater Estates garden. Once when Vanessa wanted to work as a wedding planner for a week, I helped her photograph a practice portfolio there. White chairs, a quartet of strings, soft petals lined the aisle. Then there was mayhem. Vanessa, wearing a dress that appeared to have cost more than my car, stood close to the altar. Her lips were barely parted as her face froze in a half-smile. She awaited the cue from the music. She had meticulously prepared for this moment. However, the music was absent. Rather, a man's strained, piercing voice pierced the atmosphere. "The husband," he said. "I can't do this." Whispers. A gulp. Vanessa blinked as if someone had turned off the lights. "I apologize," he added, taking a step back. "I made an effort to get over it. Yes, I did. However, I located the mails. Ones you sent to your former partner. I am aware that 2 weeks ago you saw him. You lied, and I know it. I believe her maid of honor was the one who shouted. The chairs have scratches on them." The camera shook. Vanessa's high-pitched, frantic voice could be heard yelling something about time misunderstanding, and it wasn't like that. However, it was too late. The bridegroom turned and left. Not quickly. He lacked any dramatic flair. Simply walked. He appeared to have abandoned his acting career. The whole thing played out in front of me in a cabin on the end of the earth, like a scene from a show I never consented to watch. My hands remained steady. My heart wasn't pounding. I simply sensed silence. A second later, Sabrina sent her next SMS. "I had no idea who else I should inform. You were worthy of witnessing this. Even though things are this way, you deserve to be there." Slowly, I put the phone down. No one was satisfied. There was no conceited elation. Its disintegration did not please me. I felt sorry for her suffering. However, I felt a sense of relief. I finally understood, not because she lost something. This was not about including her. It was about no longer having to be. To Sabrina, I didn't respond. How could I respond? I apologized for Vanessa. Did I find it surprising? No. I simply placed the phone on the windowsill face down and stood there for a while, observing the snow drifting sideways in the early morning light. Once more, there was silence. Nevertheless, something had changed inside of me, not outside. I wasn't upset. I was no longer even hurt. I was finished. I bought some root veggies from a local stand and used them to make a pot of fish stew later that day. I let the steam curl into the chilly air by opening the tiny window above the sink. I would hear birds in the distance every few minutes. Nothing pressing. There was no urgent matter requiring my help. I was drinking tea by the fire that evening when the subsequent communication arrived. My mother gave it to me. "Vanessa is inconsolable. We were not prepared for this. Perhaps now would be a good moment to get in touch, even though I know things haven't been ideal between you two." I gazed at the message until the screen went dark. It was there. The pattern reappeared. I was visible when they needed anything. It wasn't because they missed me. It wasn't because they noticed me. Instead, it was because I was once again valuable in my role as the calm, trustworthy daughter. "No, I apologize for not inviting you. No, you should have been included. Simply, make contact." They acted as though it was my duty to repair the damage they had caused. I didn't respond. I switched off my phone and threw it in the drawer containing the old visitor maps and matches in the cabin. I tightened the blanket about my shoulders and allowed the fire to burn slowly. The following day, I trekked to Thingvellir, a broad area where two tectonic plates converged, as the locals call it. There the ground separated. It was visible to you. Under your feet, two continents steadily separate. I realized as I stood there, it had always been that way with my family. Not all of my abandonment happened at once. I wasn't completely cut off. Gradually and silently, I was drifting off word by word, year by year, inch by inch, until the distance between us became too great to pretend we were still on the same page. I composed a letter that evening while seated at the desk by the window. It was not intended for mailing. It was not intended for mailing. It's simply a letter meant for me. For the me who once believed that she needed to prove herself to be accepted. There was nothing wrong with you. You were sufficient at all times. Fitting into a space that wouldn't hold you was not your duty. When I was done, I folded the paper, set it on the windowsill beneath a little stone, and watched the sky grow deeper into that gentle northern blue that lingers right before bed. I did something I hadn't done in years the following morning. I took a seat, made myself another cup of coffee, and did nothing else. No plans, no emails. Don't read through other people's unending lives. Only me. The silence. Additionally, there was the roaring fire that had not yet turned to coals. I felt whole for the first time in a long time. Not because there was anything fixed. For once, I wasn't striving to be someone else or somewhere else. I strolled into the town center at about midday. The town center was filled with small stores, the aroma of damp snow and fresh bread, and the sight of wool scarves hanging outside. I went to a cafe and ordered a croissant and black tea, the kind that brought back memories of Sundays when I was a kid, the infrequent occasions when Dad took us out before he became too exhausted or preoccupied with finances and church gossip. I pulled out my notebook. I did not write for the benefit of the customers, not for caption editing, merely to record what I observed. A child can be heard laughing in the snow. A 70-something man is drawing in a big notepad. A young couple silently eats soup, their fingers grazing the table. Their silence had a certain beauty. No show. There was no audience present. It reminded me of my favorite part of photography, documenting things as they were not as people wanted them to be seen. With my hands nestled in my coat and the wind caressing my face like a familiar companion, I made my way home. As if the world couldn't leave anything unaltered. The doorbell rang that night. It had been days since I heard a knock. A young man, perhaps 20 years old, was holding a protected envelope as I opened the door. Nervous, he smiled. "Package for you? From the United States." I accepted it, thanked him, and stood looking at the handwriting for a while. Vanessa. There was a little box inside. There were no words written on it. The box contained a flash disc and a folded photo that I hadn't seen in over a decade. We were the ones, wearing matching overalls and popsicle stains. She and I sat on the roof of Grandma's former home. She put her arm around my shoulder. I half closed my eyes to the sunlight. In her distinctive calligraphy on the reverse, "How we lost each other is beyond me, but I am aware that I miss you." I held the picture for a while. I then connected the flash drive. Just 2 files were present. One was a little film that was shot a few days prior to the wedding and showed Vanessa seated in what appeared to be her bedroom, looking into the camera with her cosmetics partially on. She didn't appear flawless. She didn't even appear calm. She glanced. "Actually?" She replied, her voice breaking. "If you're watching this, it means everything went wrong, or maybe exactly the way it needed to. I was afraid to ask you. I assumed we would be compared if you came. I would also lose. As usual. I am aware that's unfair. I simply—" She paused and cleaned her face. "Why I did what I did is unknown to me. However, I am aware that you were never the issue. I was. Blackness crept across the screen. I sat with my hands folded in my lap for a long time. And I didn't feel any heavier when I eventually stood up. I sensed it was less heavy. Her assertions were accurate. Not because everything was repaired overnight. However, I didn't require anything more. I had already discovered why I had traveled to Iceland. Not resolution, not retaliation. There was no expression of regret or resolution. There was barely enough space to remember who I was before the silence. I watched the globe hold its breath the following morning while standing on the brink of a frozen lake. Though not lifeless, the air was still, simply waiting. The earth appeared to have paused in its listening. I hadn't gotten much sleep. It was not that I was restless, but rather that something within me had changed too profoundly to describe. The flash drive was on my mind all the time. The picture. Vanessa's voice was raw and tremulous. She had not begged for pardon in her words. She hadn't begged for forgiveness at all. However, they brought something unexpected with them, a sort of admission, an epiphany. And that fact was sufficient. I didn't require a big show. I didn't need her to plead for forgiveness or fly across the ocean. I simply wanted someone to express what no one has before dared to say, "The broken one wasn't you." My thoughts were calmer than they had been in years as I made my way back to the cabin. I let the wood stove do its work, read half a page of an old book, and then proceeded to cook oatmeal. Around noon, I pulled out my camera for me, not for clients or work. Not far from the cabin was a ridge that I had seen on my first day, but hadn't yet investigated. I hiked gently there, pausing occasionally, to hear the wind sifting through bare trees and the crunch of snow beneath my boots. And I discovered it at the top. The path led to a small clearing, not touched. A single crooked tree stood against the winter, as if it had nothing to prove. I raised the camera, took a picture, and then stopped. I then decreased it. Not every moment deserves a photograph. We intend to retain some moments. I took a seat under the tree and allowed the quiet to envelop me. I reflected on my early years, including the birthdays. I smiled for photos I wasn't really in, the report cards that no one saw, and the evenings when I sobbed into my pillow for unknown reasons. I then considered the present. I thought about the woman I'd become, solid, not ostentatious, not the center of anyone's narrative. Keep quiet, complete. I didn't respond to Vanessa or even to Sabrina, but I did write one final note that evening. I rarely posted personal content on my photography blog, but I decided to share this brief post. The individuals who raised you may not always acknowledge your current self. They sometimes adore the most easily explained version of you. To fit within their frame, however, is not your purpose. Your goal is to construct your own. I neglected to read the comments. I didn't hold out for cheers. I simply shut down my laptop, made a cup of tea, and sat by the window to listen to the soft sound of the wind rustling the snow outside. Nobody remained to impress. There was no script to follow. Just this calm, gentle knowledge that I had not only survived what had threatened to destroy me, but also it was too much for me. It was lightly snowing the day I left Iceland. The snow was not the heavy, sharp variety that blinds your path, but the gentle kind that falls like ash and melts instantly on skin. With my camera around my neck, my bags beside the door, and the air I was breathing feeling oddly cleaner than anywhere else I had been, I stood outside the cabin one more time. I had no intention of leaving. I had the option to leave. Therefore, I chose to go. There's a difference, and I've finally experienced it. I walked down to the lake one last time. They were starting to defrost around the margins. Under the surface, the first indications of spring were the quiet cracks in the ice. I reflected on all the time I had spent simply being here. Not demonstrating, not defending, failing to perform. Simply breathing and recovery. I noticed a stone I had positioned weeks prior, immediately following the writing of that message to myself, nestled behind the ancient tree at the ridge as I turned to go. It was there, even though I hadn't intended to go back to it. It's still there, unmoved. I grinned and dusted the snow off its surface. It's funny how a seemingly insignificant event can have such a profound impact on a person's life. I didn't check my phone on the flight home, not once. I didn't see if Vanessa had sent me another message. I didn't browse through family pictures, wedding rumors, or the never-ending reverberation of other people's lives. For the first time in a long time, I could only see ahead when I peered out the window. The house was quiet when I returned to the United States. The candle, which I had left burning for too long before I left, still emitted a subtle scent of peppermint and cedar in my flat. I took my time unpacking. I rearranged everything, but not exactly as it was. Not precisely. I was drinking tea from my favorite cracked mug in the kitchen a few days later, when I noticed the old family photo album on the bottom shelf. I hadn't opened that one in years. I stood off to the side, smiling politely, barely visible in any of the photos. I took it out, turned page after page, and then carefully closed it. Then I got up and moved it behind a stack of travel books to the little bookcase by the window. My intention was not to hide it. It was not intended to be overlooked. I did this merely to remove it from the main body of my narrative. I sat down and checked my camera roll later that night. I only printed one picture from Iceland. No one would be impressed by the shot's waterfalls or expansive landscapes. The tree stood silently, its branches twisted, but still reaching for the sky rooted firmly in the frozen earth. I put it on my desk in a plain frame. I made tea after that, cracked the window open. Outside, I listened to the quiet of early spring and let the day conclude the way I want it to, calmly and lovingly.